Hi, I'm Stephanie Black, and I am a missionary seminary professor. I'm a teaching elder in the Evangelical Presbyterian Church and a member of the EPC's new Presbytery of the Coastal Mid-Atlantic. You may know that the center of gravity of global Christianity in the last few years is shifting from Europe and North America to Africa, Asia, and what we call the Global South. You can see a little bit of it in the changing proportions on this graph. My job is to help with leadership development in the places where God's kingdom is growing the fastest. I started out in Ethiopia. I was there for 8 years, teaching at the Ethiopian Graduate School of Theology, then 5 years in Kenya, teaching at the Association of Evangelicals in Africa's flagship graduate school. I was with another organization, and then a few years ago, I had the opportunity to join EPC World Outreach in partnership with Surge. EPC missionaries, about a third of us, are partnered with organizations who are already doing dynamic work in various parts of the world. My job involves traveling, teaching, consulting, supporting. You can imagine that the traveling bit is a little different right now. But in 2019, I was at Hope Africa University in Burundi. I was in Myanmar, teaching at the Myanmar Evangelical Graduate School of Theology. I go to SIACS each year in South India, the South Asian Institute for Advanced Christian Studies. I actually in 2019 went to help do some training for Chinese house pastors who'd been quietly brought across the border from Thailand. But in the last year or so, it's been Zoom, as with this class at Asia Theological Seminary in the Philippines. My home base for the last 4 or 5 years has been Dublin. You may be surprised to hear that Dublin is considered the least evangelized English-speaking country in the world because it's completely, at this point, post-Catholic. I used up my visa eligibility in Dublin, and so now I'm being transferred to a new assignment in Prague, Czech Republic. Prague is quite different in that it's one of the most atheistic countries in the world. The Czech Republic, about 80% of the population would call themselves atheists. Surge has planted an international English-speaking church in Prague, and that'll be my base there. But my primary focus will still be global theological education, as I've done before. Fortunately, I've been doing it long enough that we get to start seeing the impact and the strategic multiplication of investing in these kinds of students. Just to tell you a couple of stories, Seb Lewengel, whose master's thesis was probably the first one I supervised in Ethiopia, went on to become the first woman in Ethiopia to get a PhD in a biblical or theological subject. She's now head of academic affairs for the Ethiopian Graduate School of Theology, where I used to teach. Brooke Ayala was one of my students in Ethiopia. You can see him here in one of the classes. You'll notice it's all men. He went on to do a PhD in South Africa and is now president of the joint Lutheran Presbyterian sort of United Seminary for Ethiopia and really all of the Horn of Africa. Agnes Ibanda in Kenya was another one of my students. She and her family are from the Democratic Republic of Congo. But after graduation, they moved thousands of miles away to the other side of Africa, new culture, new language for them, to be missionaries with the Church of the Nazarene in Madagascar. George Ogala, who I taught both in his master's programs and PhD program, after graduation became the national director of Focus Kenya. Focus would be the InterVarsity sister organization, both part of the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students, or IFES. George has in this past year become the chief operating officer of IFES globally, based in London. Those are the students who I taught years ago. The students who I'm teaching now will be the next people like this. We just don't know where they're going. But I invite you to join me in this project of training the next generation of leaders for the global church.